6 years had passed since I last saw her. And then, there she was, Amanda, standing on a stage in downtown Washington, D.C., cool as ice, presenting under a surname I did not recognize, Amanda Dillon. The moment that name appeared on the screen, something within me stalled. I stood frozen in the middle of a crowded biotech summit, my badge hanging around my neck, half a cup of burnt hotel coffee in my hand. The noise of the conference faded into a dull hum as I stared at the woman with whom I had once shared a home, a life, and a future. She had not changed much, still graceful, still poised. But her hair was shorter now, curled in tight waves that framed her jaw, as though she were daring the world to come too close. Her voice remained steady as she explained some breakthrough in gene targeting. Yet when she glanced up and saw me, she broke, if only for a second. Her lips parted, her breath caught. I swear I saw the shimmer of tears beginning to form in her eyes. She blinked them away, just as she always had, as if vulnerability were a language she had never fully learned. I do not know why I did not turn away. Perhaps I wanted her to see me. Perhaps I wanted to see what guilt looked like upon her face. Or perhaps I simply could not move. She looked down quickly, pretending not to have noticed me. But I saw the lapse, and it shook me more than I cared to admit. Amanda and I had lived together in Boston for nearly 8 years. I was in academic research, and she was climbing the biotech ladder. We had our rhythm: coffee at 7, split shifts for laundry, modest takeout on Fridays. It was not glamorous, but it was ours. Then one day, she was gone. There was no affair, no screaming match, no grand betrayal I could point to at the time, only a slow vanishing. She told me she needed room to grow, to breathe differently. Those were her words. I had offered to adjust, to make space, but by then she was already gone. Physically, she lingered a few weeks longer, a suitcase by the door, but emotionally, she had been packing for months. And now she was here, Amanda Dillon. A new name, a new city, a new version of herself, one that no longer included me. When her talk concluded, the audience offered polite applause. She stepped down from the stage and disappeared into the mingling crowd. I assumed she would avoid me. Instead, 20 minutes later, she walked directly toward me as if drawn by gravity itself. "Daniel," she said, her voice lower than I remembered. "Thinner. I didn't think you'd be here." "I could say the same," I replied. She offered a faint smile and glanced down at the ID badge clipped to my belt. "Lost Research Initiative," she read aloud. "You stayed in the game. And you changed your name." That gave her pause. For a moment, she fell silent, nodding slowly, as though conceding something without ever speaking it aloud. I could have asked 100 questions. Why the new identity? Why the tears? Why now? But I didn't. Instead, I simply said, "Do you have time for coffee?" She hesitated, then gave a small, almost embarrassed nod. And just like that, we were walking side by side through the lobby as if nothing had ever happened, two people pretending not to carry the weight of an unfinished story. What would you do if the woman who broke your heart suddenly reappeared? Softer, older, and wrapped in silence? I had no idea what came next, but I couldn't walk away. We found a quiet corner in the hotel cafe. Glass walls, leather chairs, and that hollow, conference room quiet that makes everything feel more fragile than it truly is. Amanda ordered green tea. I kept to black coffee, though my hands were not as steady as I had hoped. She cradled the cup between her palms as though it might contain some kind of script, as if by staring deeply enough, she could find the right words. "I didn't think I'd see you here," she said again, this time more softly, almost like a confession. I nodded. "Biotech Summit. I figured I might run into someone from the old lab. I just didn't think it would be you." Her smile was faint, careful. "I almost didn't come. I've been avoiding the East Coast for a while." A moment passed. I suppose that didn't work out. I let the silence linger before I spoke. "So, Dylan." She met my eyes without flinching. My mother's maiden name. It felt like a clean break. I leaned back, crossing my arms. "From what?" Her gaze drifted toward the street outside, where a tram buzzed by under the gray Washington, D.C. sky. From the version of me that always compromised. The one who waited for weekends, counted down to dinners, thought she could balance it all. I said nothing. She took a long sip. "I left Boston and moved to Seattle first. Took a fellowship there, then a startup gig in San Diego, then up to the Bay. Every place, I thought, this is it. This is where I become the woman I wanted to be." "Did you?" I asked. She paused. I became someone. I studied her face for any flicker of regret, but there was only honesty there, a tired honesty. Amanda always chased momentum. When we met, she used to say she hated still water. She was terrified of getting stuck. I thought I understood that back then, but what I didn't see was that sometimes I was the stillness she was trying to escape. Marriage didn't fit into that. I said, not bitter, just curious. She shook her head slowly. No, I tried to make room for it. I really did. But every time I booked a flight, every time I signed another NDA, I felt like I was peeling off the life we had layer by layer until there was nothing left to carry. That landed harder than I expected. But you didn't say any of that, I said, my voice low. You just left. I was afraid if I tried to explain, you'd convince me to stay. And I couldn't risk that. The silence that followed wasn't angry. It was familiar, the kind we used to have when our fights had nothing left to burn. She looked at me then, really looked. You were always steadier than me, and I didn't know how to love you without slowing down. I stirred my coffee, watching the swirl of cream settle into the black. And now, she offered a sad smile. Now I know I was not running toward anything. I was simply running. We sat like that for a while, our cups cooling between us, the weight of her honesty settling into the space between our chairs. Whatever came next, I knew this much. Amanda was not the villain I had painted in my mind. She was just a woman who had chosen herself at the cost of something we both once called home. We moved outside after the cafe grew too loud. We found a pair of iron chairs beneath one of those oversized hotel umbrellas, the kind that shade you from the sun and, if you let them, from the truth. The pavement still held the warmth of the afternoon heat, but the air was cooling. Trams rattled past on the nearby track, their soft electric hum threading through our pauses as though it belonged there. Amanda sat with her legs crossed, hands folded neatly in her lap, her tea cooling untouched on the table. Her posture was calm, too calm, and that was when I knew something else was coming. She did not look at me when she spoke. There is something I should have told you a long time ago. My heart did not jump. Not anymore. Whatever she was about to say, I had already survived it in some version. I was involved with someone, she said, quiet but deliberate. Back when I was still traveling for work, still married to you. I looked straight ahead, past the trimmed hedges and out toward the people walking by, strangers, laughing, alive. I took a slow breath. Your boss. She nodded once. Evan. He was the director at the time. The San Diego trip was the start. It wasn't planned. Not in the beginning. I did not say anything. I just waited. That seemed to shake her more than if I had shouted. I convinced myself it was harmless, she continued. Work dinners, late labs, a kiss that turned into something else. And every time I came home to you, I lied. That word, lied, hung in the air like smoke. I remembered those nights well. The way she would unpack her suitcase as though nothing had happened. The way she would. I fell asleep so quickly. I told myself it was just temporary, she added, that it didn't mean I loved you any less. I turned to look at her. You really believe that? Her eyes welled, but she blinked hard and fast. Kept it together. I had to. Otherwise, I wouldn't have survived the guilt. The tram hummed by again, a soft metallic groan. She reached for her tea, but her hand trembled, so she let it go. I wasn't trying to punish you, she said. It wasn't about anything you did. It was about who I was becoming. And Evan, he just represented that shift. I studied her face. The lines that hadn't been there 6 years ago, the faint scar near her lip. I didn't recognize her. She looked like a woman who'd seen herself from the outside and didn't always like what she saw. Why? Tell me now, I asked. Amanda leaned back, her eyes tracking the people across the plaza. Because I didn't want to keep wearing the lie in front of you. Not after today. I nodded slowly. I always wondered. She looked over, startled. You knew? Not at first. But eventually. Yeah, I knew. Her mouth parted, stunned into silence. I figured, I said. You'd either choose us, or you wouldn't. And with that, I stood, gave her a small nod. I'm going to walk a bit. I didn't expect her to follow. She didn't. She just sat there under the umbrella, alone with the truth she'd finally let breathe. I didn't go far, just wandered the edge of the plaza until the knot in my chest loosened enough to let me breathe again. After 10 minutes, maybe 15, I heard her footsteps behind me. Light, hesitant. She caught up without saying a word and fell into step beside me. We walked in silence past the conference banners flapping in the breeze. I could feel her eyes on me, waiting for permission to speak. Or maybe punishment. I gave her neither. I never thought you knew, she said finally. I did. She looked away, her expression unreadable. For how long? I shrugged. Hard to say. Pieces of it came together over time. It came in slowly. The hotel receipts, the last-minute trips that didn't add up, the way you'd flinch when I asked simple questions. She wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly chilled by more than the weather. So, why didn't you ever say anything? She asked. Why didn't you confront me? I stopped walking and turned to face her. Because I wasn't going to beg. Amanda's breath caught, as though she hadn't prepared for that answer. I figured, I said quietly. You'd either choose us or you wouldn't. Her face crumpled. It wasn't dramatic. No sobbing, no scene. Just this sudden collapse in her eyes, as if her own memory of who I was didn't quite match the man standing in front of her now. You gave me that much trust, she whispered. I shook my head. No, I gave you space. That's not the same thing. She pressed a hand to her mouth, as if holding back something sharp. Guilt, probably, or shame finally surfacing after years of being kept in a back room. I thought you'd hate me, she said. I did. For a while. Then I stopped. That made her look up. You stopped hating me? I nodded. Hate needs fuel. And I ran out. Amanda stared at me as though she didn't know what to do with that kind of peace. And truthfully, I didn't either. I hadn't rehearsed this moment, hadn't plotted it out. I just let it be what it was. Unfinished grief, cracked dignity, and the quiet ache of something you can't hold anymore. She wiped her cheek with the back of her hand, laughing softly at herself. You were always better at grace than I deserved. I gave a small smile. I just got tired of bleeding every time I thought about you. She opened her mouth to say something else, but nothing came. Just a slow exhale and the look of someone who'd been granted mercy when they expected fire. We kept walking, not toward anywhere in particular, just two people drifting along the edge of what used to be, unsure whether they were stepping toward closure or something else. It was something else entirely. The summit had arranged university booths along the East Corridor, alumni engagement, department showcases, tech partnerships. Most people passed them without a glance, too busy networking for jobs or nodding through panel discussions. But as Amanda and I drifted back inside, we found ourselves walking straight toward the familiar green and gold banner of our old alma mater. She slowed first. I felt it before I saw it, the subtle shift in her posture, the small hitch in her breath. God, she said, stopping in front of the table. They still use the same trifold posters. I let out a quiet chuckle. Some things really don't change. Two student representatives stood behind the table, probably undergraduates flown in to pitch graduate programs. They offered us stickers and pamphlets as though we were just another pair of strangers. Amanda picked up a campus brochure and thumbed through it slowly. I watched her eyes settle on a photo of the central quad, the same brick paths we used to cut across, half asleep, for 8 o'clock classes. Then she said it, not dramatically, without even looking at me. We were happy once. The words didn't sting. They just landed. I glanced at the photo over her shoulder. Fall trees, students lounging on benches. It looked the same as the day we met. Me rushing to intro to biochemistry, her spilling coffee on her own textbook, muttering curses under her breath. You still hate October? I asked, trying to smile. Amanda gave a soft laugh. Only when the wind hit sideways. I watched her for a second longer. She was somewhere else now, some distant memory neither of us had planned on reopening today. It wasn't about betrayal or endings in that moment. It was about the beginning, about the two kids who once sat under a maple tree and talked about building something that would last. I haven't thought about that bench in years, she murmured. You used to bring bagels and leave the cream cheese on the wrapper. Half the cheese is missing because you were always stealing mine. She laughed again, and for a moment, that laugh sounded like her old self. The version from before ambition grew too loud, before the flights, the passwords, the absence. She placed the brochure back down gently. They'd probably laugh if they knew how far we've fallen. Maybe, I said. Or maybe they'd just understand. She looked at me, really looked, and I saw something flicker in her eyes. Regret, perhaps, or simply the weight of realizing how long it had been since anyone stood beside her who remembered who she used to be without having to ask. Neither of us said much after that. We just stood there a while longer, surrounded by brochures and echoes, letting the past breathe. Later that afternoon, We found a bench just outside the hotel, half shaded by a tired oak tree. The conference hum was behind us now, muffled by glass walls and distance. Out here, the city moved at its own rhythm. Cars, pigeons, joggers passing by with earbuds and narrowed eyes. It felt easier to breathe. Amanda sat beside me, her blazer folded neatly in her lap. I fixed my gaze on a crack in the pavement, as though it held the secret to something she still hadn't figured out. I stayed with him for almost 2 years, she said quietly. Evan. I didn't react. Just let her keep going. At first, it felt electric. He challenged me, pushed me. We were on the road all the time. Conferences, labs, launches. It felt like I was finally living at the speed I wanted. I waited. She picked at a loose thread on her sleeve. But once I was in it, I realized I wasn't the one steering. He made the decisions about everything, where we lived, what I worked on, who I talked to. It was subtle at first, tiny shifts. Then suddenly, I was asking for permission to breathe. Her voice didn't crack, but there was a hollowness to it, as though she'd rehearsed this truth in her head 100 times, but had never said it aloud. He didn't hit me, she added. Swiftly. Not like that. But he occupied all the space, every last inch of it. I glanced toward her, and for the first time that day, her composure had slipped. Her shoulders had fallen, and her hands lay still. She was no longer Amanda Dillon, vice president of anything. She was simply the woman I once knew, bruised now in a different way. You always did chase storms, I said softly. She blinked, turning to me, a faint smile lifting one corner of her mouth. I suppose I thought lightning was the same thing as light. We sat together in silence for a time. I did not ask what had finally made her leave him. There was no need. The answer was right there, in the softened tone of her voice when she spoke, in the smallness of her movements, in the guarded way she held herself. This was not the Amanda who used to debate case studies over dinner and fall asleep with half-finished articles scattered across her chest. This was someone who had learned the cost of being tied to the wrong kind of fire. I kept thinking, she said, that if I just worked harder, bent a little more, he would meet me halfway. But halfway never came. I nodded, letting the weight of those words settle between us. I thought about calling you once, she added, when I left. But it felt unfair. Because you knew I'd answer, I said. Her eyes met mine, and she gave the slightest nod. I would have, I said plainly. That was the truth. Even after everything, I would have picked up. Not because I still loved her, those wires had long been severed, but because I had loved her. And that kind of love, the quiet and steady sort, does not vanish simply because someone does not know how to return it. The wind stirred, sweeping a dry leaf across the pavement. Amanda drew her blazer back over her shoulders, more out of habit than chill. You're quieter now, she said, glancing at me. Yes, I replied. Some storms teach you that. The alumni mixer was held in one of those ballrooms that tried too hard to feel casual. Dimly lit. The lighting was soft, jazz covers played low, and little white plates were piled with shrimp skewers and underseasoned bruschetta. It was the kind of event where everyone wore name tags like armor and smiled as though they had rehearsed it in the mirror. I hadn't planned on staying long, just enough to be polite, perhaps to nod through a few hellos from people who still remembered the old lab. But when I walked in and saw Amanda already seated at one of the round tables near the back, alone and scrolling through her phone, I knew how the night would unfold. A moment later, one of the event coordinators spotted me and waved. Daniel, great you're here. You're with Amanda, right? We're seating couples together to save space. Before I could answer, she was already scribbling my name on the folded card beside Amanda's. I gave Amanda a look as I pulled out the chair. Guess we're still a team. She offered a dry laugh. Conference logic. Dinner arrived in courses, tiny ones. A salad I could have balanced on 2 fingers, followed by something that tried very hard to be chicken marsala. Amanda picked at hers more out of politeness than hunger. I ate just enough to avoid seeming antisocial. Around us, conversations buzzed with startup talk, old lab memories, and forced nostalgia. People leaned in to ask Amanda about her role at Genentech, then turned to me with a casual, "And you're both still in Boston." I didn't bother correcting them. Neither did she. Amanda laughed at something one of the former professors said, a high, brittle sound that didn't quite match the expression on her face. It was the kind of laugh that said, I remember how to do this, even if it doesn't fit anymore. I watched her carefully. There was something fragile in the way she held herself tonight, less composed, less armored. Maybe it was the crowd. Maybe it was the closeness. Maybe it was the memory of who we used to be, creeping in around the edges of every practiced smile and every recalled inside joke. We clinked glasses. Glasses were raised by a group across the table who clearly assumed we were still married. Someone offered a toast to lasting partnerships, and Amanda's hand went still around her wine glass. I leaned in slightly, just enough for her to hear. They think we made it. She looked at me, and for a heartbeat, I saw something raw flicker in her eyes. Maybe, she said softly. In another version of us, we did. I nodded. I didn't push. Because tonight wasn't about reopening wounds. It was about watching how some things can look intact from far away, until you get close and see the cracks spidering under the surface. The music swelled a little louder. Glasses clinked. People laughed with just a little too much effort. And there we sat, two people side by side, surrounded by assumptions, pretending for one night we hadn't come undone. The next morning, the summit's closing panel was set up in one of the larger halls. Rows of padded chairs, soft uplighting, branded banners curling slightly at the corners. Amanda had been invited to sit on a discussion about leadership under pressure. Last-minute addition, someone said. She didn't seem thrilled. I took a seat near the middle. Not too close, not too far, just enough to see her face. The moderator was a tall woman in a crimson blazer with the kind of voice you usually hear on public radio, warm, polished, practiced. She introduced the panelists one by one, dropping titles like medals, COO, Senior VP, Founder. Amanda was last. Her name, Amanda Dillon, rolled out smoothly. No mention of Reeves. The conversation started out generic enough. Strategies, hiring practices, navigating burnout. Amanda kept her answers brief, measured, safe. Then came the curveball. So, Amanda, the moderator said, smiling. You mentioned in your pre-panel notes how important partner support was in your early leadership journey. I'd love for you to speak to that. What role did your spouse play in helping you grow? The air in the room grew still, just slightly. My chest tightened, and I saw Amanda's back go rigid in her seat. She had not mentioned me in any of her notes. Of that much I was certain. The moderator, of course, was assuming, as everyone else did, that we were still married. Amanda looked out over the room, then down at her lap. I could see it, the split second in which she considered dodging the question, offering some vague reply about emotional support and personal growth. But instead, she took a quiet breath and did something she had not done in years. She told the truth. I wasn't fair to my partner, she said, her voice low, almost steady. I left a good man for ambition, and it cost me more than I imagined. The moderator blinked. A few heads turned. Amanda continued. I convinced myself I could have it all, career, independence, legacy, and that anything I left behind would be worth it. I told myself I was evolving. But looking back, I see now that I mistook distance for progress. I left someone who gave me grace when I did not deserve it. And I didn't even say goodbye properly. Silence followed. Not awkward, not embarrassed, just still. I watched her shoulders lift slightly, then fall. She wasn't looking at me, but her words landed as though they had been aimed from 10 feet away and 6 years too late. The moderator recovered quickly, nodded with a forced smile, and pivoted the conversation to another panelist. But Amanda stayed quiet for the rest of the session, her hands folded in her lap, eyes lowered, not ashamed, not proud, just settled, as if she had finally handed off a burden she had been dragging behind her for too long. When the panel ended, the applause was polite. People stood, gathering their coats and water bottles. Amanda stepped down from the stage slowly, her movements smaller than usual. As she passed me, she did not speak. She simply met my eyes for one heartbeat. That was enough. Because there is a difference between regret and honesty. And sometimes when they finally meet, something shifts. For the first time in years, Amanda had spoken aloud what I had lived in silence. And somehow, it did not hurt the way I thought it would. I found the koi pond behind the conference center by accident. Low stone walls, soft bubbling water, and the hum of DC nightlife just far enough away to feel unreal. It was quiet. Finally, I sat on the edge, elbows on my knees, watching the fish glide beneath the surface as though they had all the time in the world. In some way, perhaps they did. Behind me, footsteps approached, slow and hesitant. I did not turn. I knew it was Amanda. She came around the corner and stood there for a moment, as if uncertain whether she should speak. You always did find the quiet places first, she said. I offered the faintest smile, eyes still on the water. Noise wears thin after a while. She sat beside me, careful not to touch. For a time, we said nothing, only listened to the soft ripple of the pond, the occasional rustle of leaves, and the kind of silence that had learned to live inside both of us. Then, almost too softly to hear, she spoke. I thought I'd forget you. The words floated out between us like breath in cold air. I did not move. She kept her eyes on the water. I told myself that once I got far enough, fast enough, you'd fade. That I'd stop waking up wondering what city you were in, if you still drank black coffee, if you still wore those ridiculous threadbare hoodies on weekends. Her voice cracked, just a little. But I didn't forget. I never did. I carry you like breath. That last part struck harder than I expected. I looked at her then, truly looked, not the version I had built in my head after she left, not the polished biotech executive, but Amanda, human and hurting. She turned her face toward me, blinking quickly. I know I can't take it back, she whispered. I know grace doesn't mean reunion. I just needed you to know. I nodded slowly. I know. And for a moment, there was nothing more to say. For the first time, the space between us did not feel like a battlefield. It felt like a scar, still there, still visible, but no longer bleeding. The next morning arrived quiet and gray. There was no grand goodbye planned, no dramatic ending. Just check-out bags, crumpled badges, and indigo coffee cups. Amanda met me in the lobby. She had a small suitcase at her side, her coat folded neatly over one arm. Her eyes looked clearer today, still tired, still heavy, but clearer, as though she had finally laid something down. I've got a car coming, she said. Airport by 10. I nodded. I'll walk you out. We did not speak much on the way, only moved through the wide hallway and out the glass doors toward the curb, where all the ride shares lined up, engines humming as if they had somewhere more important to be. The wind pushed against us, not harsh, just enough to remind us the weekend was over. We stopped at the entrance, right at the edge of parting. Amanda turned toward me, both hands resting on the suitcase handle. You always were the one who showed up, she said, even when I didn't deserve it. I did not answer right away, only studied her face. No makeup today, no practiced expression, just Amanda, stripped of ambition, stripped of apology. Real. Then I said gently, we're not the same people anymore. She blinked, and I could see the truth of it land behind her eyes. No resistance, no argument. I know, she said, not a protest, just acceptance, the kind that takes years to reach. There was no grand speech, no desperate reach for something that had already unraveled too far to hold. Just two people standing in front of automatic doors, knowing this was the last quiet page in a chapter neither of us expected to reread. The car pulled up. Amanda looked at me one last time, then smiled, small, tired, and real. Take care of yourself, Daniel. You too, I said. And with that, she stepped forward, pulled the door open, and was gone. The car vanished from sight. I watched as it joined the stream of traffic and was consumed by the city. I felt no emptiness, not any longer. I turned to leave. The vehicle had already disappeared around the bend in the flow of cars, and I was moving back toward the hotel entrance when I heard her voice. Daniel. It was scarcely louder than the wind, yet I halted and turned. Amanda stood just outside the automatic doors. The car had not taken her, not yet. She was fixed in place, her suitcase still beside her, her fingers clenched tightly around her conference badge as though it were the only anchor keeping her from drifting away. Her eyes met mine, wide, unsteady, as if she were poised to leap without knowing where she might land. Would you ever? She swallowed, then tried again, more softly this time. Would you ever try again? The question did not surprise me, yet it still carried a sting, for it arose from that part of her that remained unhealed. The part that wished to rewrite the ending without retracing the wreckage. The part that remembered what we once had only now, when it felt too distant to reclaim, without tearing through years of silence, and something darker still. I held her gaze, allowing her time. Then I smiled, softly, gently, without cruelty. Not with ghosts. Amanda's lips parted. She did not weep. She did not plead. But I watched the truth settle into her, clean, undeniable. She nodded slowly, and that was all. A single, quiet nod, like someone closing the final page of a book whose ending they never foresaw. I turned back toward the street and began to walk. Not quickly, not triumphantly, just steadily. The morning crowd was growing dense. Tourists tugging roller bags, consultants checking flights on their phones, city workers beginning their day. I stepped into that blur of motion and let myself dissolve into it, piece by piece. Behind me, I did not look, but I knew. She remained there, clutching her badge, still rooted to the sidewalk as though by holding on tightly enough, she could reverse what had passed. But nothing rewinds. We both understood that now. There is no distinct moment when you feel a chapter truly close. No audible snap. No cinematic cue. Only the quiet recognition that something you once believed would carry you forever has finally set you down. I made it halfway down the block before the weight in my chest began to ease. Not gone, but lighter. And that is when I realized I was no longer angry. Not at her. Not even at myself. For years, I had carried this version of Amanda in my mind. Half saint, half traitor. The one who vanished, who offered no explanation, who left me sorting through silence as though it held answers. But the real Amanda, she was merely human, flawed, afraid, restless. She did not destroy me. I survived myself. And that may be the most dangerous lie we ever believe, that those who hurt us define our ending. They do not. We do. If you have made it this far into my story, thank you for walking through it with me. Perhaps you have had your own Amanda. Perhaps you have been her. And perhaps, just perhaps, you are still waiting for someone to choose you after they have already let you go. Do not wait to be chosen. You are not a backup plan. You are not a ghost. You are still here. And that matters more than you may realize. If this story meant something to you, leave a comment, share your own, or simply say, I'm still here, below. Because sometimes, that is the first step back into the light. If this story resonated, tell me about your turning point. And if you have ever had to walk away from a ghost, just type, I made it.